Shalom, Haverim, and hello, friends. Good to see you on this Sunday morning or whenever you are watching. I heard a story this week about a teacher. It was the first day of school, and she was trying to be very encouraging. She wanted to show all the children that they could be something, that they could succeed when they grew up. So as she was making this point, she said, I want all of the stupid people in this classroom to stand up. Well, a few seconds go by and nobody has stood up. And then all at once, this young man named Johnny, he stands right up, and the teacher looks at him. She says, Johnny, why are you standing? Do you really think that you're stupid? And Johnny looked at his teacher right in the eye and he said, no, I don't think I'm stupid, but I felt bad for you up here standing all by yourself. Well, the question I want to ask today is, what do you stand for? Now, I know that many people have watched the musical Hamilton. It's been on Disney Plus all summer. Maybe you saw a live version in theaters before. But there's this interesting dynamic, this back and forth between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. And early on, Mr. Burr gives Mr. Hamilton a suggestion. He tells him to talk less and smile more. He tells Hamilton, you'll get a lot more done, a lot more accomplished if people don't always know what you're thinking or what you are for or against. Well, a few minutes later, Hamilton speaks back to Burr and he says, Burr, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? And there's actually some historical evidence to suggest that Hamilton actually said this to Burr. If you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? And of course, anybody that grew up in the 1990s, especially if you were a fan of country music, you know that Alexander Hamilton got that line from Aaron Tippin. Aaron Tippin had the song, you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. Okay, I may have gotten the order backwards there. Maybe Tippin got it from Hamilton. I don't know, but you get the point. You've got to stand for something. If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. So the question again is, what do you stand for? Well, our Old Testament passage from the lectionary this week comes to us from the book of Exodus. It's the very end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. And in this passage, we learn that there's a new leader in Egypt. And it's a new Pharaoh. And this Pharaoh didn't know about the ancestry of the Hebrew people. They didn't know that Joseph had helped lead the Egyptians through this great famine all these years ago. What this new Pharaoh knew was that there were a lot of Hebrew people, and they were strong, and to him, they seemed scary. They seemed to be a threat to him and his power. So this Pharaoh brought in the Hebrew midwives, the women that went and helped deliver Hebrew babies. And these women were named Shiphrah and Puah. There's two of the very few women that are named in the book of Exodus. So Shiphrah and Puah, the Hebrew midwives. And Pharaoh says to these Hebrew midwives, he says, whenever there's a Hebrew baby born, you midwives are to kill all of the male children and allow the females to live. This was his way of controlling the population through infanticide, killing off the babies. Well, time goes by and Pharaoh's looking around. He's like, there's still a lot of Hebrew boys around here. Something went wrong. They didn't hear me right, or just what happened, I don't know. So Pharaoh calls in Shiphrah and Puah and has this conversation. He says, what's going on here? Why are there so many Hebrew boys? And they say this in Exodus chapter 1. They say, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. Well, that was a lie. These women chose not to follow Pharaoh's orders. They defied him. And when they say this in this passage, they're actually using the same demeaning term that Pharaoh would have used to refer to an animal. The word that they used to describe the vigor of the Hebrew women was often used to refer to a beast of burden, like a cow or an oxen out working in the field. Essentially, they're throwing this language right back at Pharaoh, saying, yeah, you see these women as nothing but animals, nothing but workers for you. Well, they're so strong, they're bringing these children into the world before we as midwives can even get there. So why did they defy Pharaoh? Why did they not follow through with his commands? The scripture is really easy and really clear. It says, because they feared God. Now, the next chapter tells us that there was a boy, a Hebrew boy, who benefited from defying Pharaoh's orders. There was this young boy who was, well, I mean, all boys are young when they're born. A boy was born, a baby boy was born, and it says in chapter 2 that his mother looked at this baby, and the NIV says she saw that he was a fine child. The Hebrew text literally says he was very good. Now, if you know your Old Testament, you know that those are the exact words that God uttered whenever he created the world. On the final day of creation, God looks out on all he's made and looks at the human beings in particular, the ones made in his own image. And God says they're not just good, they are very good. So what Pharaoh has called to eliminate, what Pharaoh has said is less than what he wants, what he has called expendable, God and this mother have called very good. And the decision that Shiphrah and Puah make affects the way the rest of the world will come into existence. So anybody want to guess what this young boy's name was? This boy was Moses. Now, Shiphrah and Puah, they did what their conscience told them to do. They did what God wanted them to do because they feared God. And it could have been very detrimental to them. So keep this story in mind, and we're going to try to bring it into our modern context a bit here. The first person that I thought of, this person that kind of follows in the shoes, the footsteps of Shiphrah and Puah, is the recently deceased man by the name of John Lewis. John Lewis encouraged people to get into what he called good trouble. And if you know anything about John Lewis, you know that he was a member of the Freedom Riders during the Civil Rights Movement. Remember, back in the Civil Rights Movement, there was a time when it was illegal in some states for people of differing races to sit together on a bus. I hope that sounds terrible and offensive to you, that was against the law for people of different races to sit together on the bus, but this was the norm. So the members of the Freedom Riders, what they did was they got on a bus in the north and they sat together, white men and African American men, white women and African American women, sitting together on this bus, and they rode the bus from the north to the south. And when they got down to the south, you know what they did? They rode the bus from the south to the north. Again, this was totally illegal in some states. Some people pulled these Freedom Riders off of the bus. Many of them were beaten. Some were imprisoned for sitting with someone of a different race. They were doing, again, what John Lewis called good trouble. Even though it was illegal, they knew it was right. It's also what Shane Claiborne has called holy mischief, and I like that term. Shane Claiborne lives in an intentional community just outside of Philadelphia, where he lives among the poorest of the poor, living in community with these folks, breaking bread together, working together, sharing their goods. And Shane Claiborne tells the story about how his group decided that they were going to, they had some money lying around, and they decided they were going to go out and buy pizzas for all of the homeless people, maybe not all the homeless people, buy pizzas for the homeless people in a local park in Philadelphia. So they bought these pizzas, they went into this park, they started serving it to homeless people or anybody that came up and wanted pizza until the police came. And the police shut them down because you're not allowed to do that. There were laws against feeding the homeless in an open air kind of location. That sort of thing could only take place in the homeless shelters. So some time went by, and Shane Claiborne and his friends, they tried to get a permit to serve the homeless in the park, and their permit was denied. And finally they said, hey, well, let's do it again, only this time we'll say it's a part of our religion. They had an outdoor service, and they served pizza and soda, and they said, this is like our communion. And that didn't go over too well. So they were arrested for feeding the homeless, arrested for doing something that Jesus calls us to do time and time again. So like Shiphrah and Puah, John Lewis and Shane Claiborne stood for something, even if it might be costly to them. Now, it's not just an Old Testament teaching. It's not just something we find way back in Exodus. If we move to the New Testament, we find the stories of the disciples who, after Jesus' death and resurrection, they're going around and they're teaching and preaching about Jesus, and they're thrown in jail. When the leaders tell them, stop teaching and preaching about Jesus, they go out and they keep teaching and preaching about Jesus. And what happens? They get thrown in jail again. And they have this memorable phrase in the book of Acts where they say, we must obey God rather than human authorities. We must obey God rather than men. Now, I know that sounds dangerous, but hear me out. This isn't a blank check to do whatever you want. This isn't like all-out anarchy that nothing matters, no laws apply to Christians. What we find in these passages is when God says to do something and the governing authorities tell us that's not permissible, the scriptures tell us to do it anyway, even if it's costly. What will you stand up for? Now, I know that these are very extreme examples. I've never been arrested. Maybe you've never been arrested for doing holy mischief either. But know that God works through everyday people. And sometimes that can be costly. It's not just prophets and it's not just pastors that God works through. It's everyday people like midwives and homeless people, like furloughed workers and retirees, like teachers and medical personnel. Now, the way God works through people doesn't always have to be illegal. Please keep that in mind. I'm not, again, encouraging people to just go out and break the law. That's not my point. But sometimes you are called to stand up for what you believe in, even when it is costly. So I think about all the people who are giving of themselves in ways to make this world more like the kingdom that Jesus came proclaiming. I think about the parents who invest their time and their energy into coaching little league teams, soccer and basketball and flag football. These things don't just happen on their own. No, these are parents, volunteers, giving of their time. I think of the people that I used to see at the library. I haven't been in the library for a few months. But the people I used to see at the library after school, sitting and tutoring students, helping them to learn how to read. And I think about one of the teachers at my children's school. It's actually just right behind me, a few hundred yards up the hill. You can't see it, can you? No. But here at Ware Elementary, I just think of this one teacher. They call him Mr. M. Mr. M led my son's running and fitness club last year, where a couple days a week, every week, he would stay after school. And he taught the kids about health and fitness. He had taken, I think as an undergraduate, he originally studied something about exercise science, and he was using that. Now as a fourth grade teacher, he was inviting fourth and fifth grade students in to teach them something that he was passionate about. I hear these stories about people volunteering their time, people giving of their money, some people even putting themselves in positions where they may experience loss. And I think of people like Shiphrah and Puah. I think of people like John Lewis and Shane Claiborne. I think of people like Mr. M. Now, you've probably heard that cute phrase floating around the internet. There's a story that there was once this boy who went up to his mom and he asked his mom, "Mom, I'm thinking about being a teacher when I grow up." And he said to his mom, he says, "Mom, what do teachers make?" And without missing a beat, the mother turned to the boy and she said, "Teachers make a difference. That's what teachers make." My friends, we have learned through reading the scriptures that there are times when we need to stand up. If you won't stand up for something, then you'll fall for anything. It's not just wise words from Aaron Tippin or Alexander Hamilton. No, these are scriptural words, like Shiphrah and Puah, like the disciples, like Reverend John Lewis and Shane Claiborne and Mr. M. I encourage you to stand up for what you believe in, even if it's costly. All right, my friends, continue to go out there, stand up for what you believe in, and remember, we must obey God, even when it's costly. All right, be awesome to each other.